Welcome to Eat Well, Travel Better, the Business of Food Travel podcast with Eric Wolf and Ashi Vale, where we help you become a better industry professional by gaining inspiration from some of the world's most successful people in the food and beverage tourism industry. With each episode, we meet these leaders and examine their secrets of success. We reveal the obstacles and challenges they have faced, along with their solutions and triumphs, and give you ideas and inspirations for many of the same business issues that you may be facing as well. And now for today's episode. I'm Eric Wolf, and I'll be your host today for episode 10 of Eat Well, Travel Better, the Business of Food Travel podcast. And joining me today is co-host Ashi Vale. Today we'll be speaking with Jenn David. Jenn is the founder and creative strategist of Jenn David Design, a California-based design studio that partners with specialty food brands to create powerful, distinct, cohesive design that commands attention and makes an impact. Great design can influence choice and decision-making by consumers, even while they are traveling. She's a bit of a prodigy when it comes to package design, and we're lucky to have her on the show today. Welcome, Jenn.
Thanks, Eric. It's good to be here.
Jenn, let's cut to the chase for our listeners. Some people may be wondering what a package design expert is doing talking about food tourism, and I see the immediate link, but could you make the link for our listeners? Can you help them to understand why we thought it was good for you to be on the show today?
Sure. So packaging design and design in general, it can really transcend into so many different areas. And just the power of design, especially as it pertains to food, is I think what we both have in common here. Just if I can give you a quick example on the power of design that came up recently, for me with a client, we did a redesign of a snack package, and they launched it in January. And I recently heard last month in April that their sales had more than doubled in just that 4 months since the launch of the new design. And they attribute it entirely to the new design of the package.
That's fantastic. I think back to my behavior when I'm traveling around, and I might be in a foreign city and I'll go by a window, a store window, a grocery store window, or a specialty food shop window. And I can't obviously I can't smell the packaging or the food. I can't see the products really. It might be something that's in a bottle or a box, but it's really the packaging that catches your eye first, I think, before sometimes even the food and drink products themselves.
It is. And really a lot of people don't realize this, but the packaging of a food product needs to go through several phases in order to close that sale and generate that interest and then close the sale. First and foremost, it needs to attract interest. It needs to be visually appealing and stand out from whatever its surroundings are, whether it's usually other products on a shelf or in a window. And then it needs to inform you as to what it is and how to use it, why it's different, why it's unique, and then kind of motivate you to buy it.
Wonderful. Well, Jenn, would you also be willing to share with us how you got into this business and what you love about it?
Yes, it's an interesting start because I never actually planned on having my own business or specializing in food. I was a couple years out of college, and I had just moved to San Francisco from Boston, where I grew up. And the dot-com bubble had just burst. So it was around 2002. And nobody was hiring. Like, absolutely nobody was hiring. It was probably the worst time to move to San Francisco, but rents were really cheap on the bright side. So,
but I don't think I've ever heard that.
That was a while ago. I found at the time that there was a lot of freelance design work to go around. So I pretty much did whatever I could find. And I was fortunate enough to get in with Williams-Sonoma at the time. I ended up working with them for several years in their packaging design department. So that's where I really got my intro to food packaging design. Learned a lot there. It was a great company to work for. And after that, that was my portfolio. So that's how I became known for specializing in food design and food packaging design, specifically for specialty food brands. As I've progressed in my career since then, I've really honed in on that specialty and found that there's really a true passion there, because I am so passionate about food and specialty food in particular, eating for health and wellness. So to be able to intersect my passion for design with my passion for food is really a true joy. And I absolutely love what I do and helping the clients that I work with.
And how did you make that segue? So you were working for Williams-Sonoma and now you have your own business. Can you tell us a little bit about how you did that?
Yeah, so I actually was working with other companies throughout the whole time. So, once I started to put that work from Williams-Sonoma in my portfolio, and then that's what I promoted essentially. Other brands that were starting out would contact me and say, hey, I really like what I saw in your portfolio. Can we work together? Can you do something like that for me? Or I'm trying to get my product into Williams-Sonoma or Whole Foods. Can you help me with that? So that's kind of it happened very organically. And I put a lot of work into it as it went, as I saw this kind of trajectory happening and this interest gathering. I really put a lot of effort into honing that specialty for myself.
Wonderful. And would you be able to share for some of the other entrepreneurs listening some of the lessons that you may have learned over the years being an entrepreneur? What were some of the challenges? What were some of the successes you've had?
Sure. It's not easy running your own business, as I'm sure everybody who's ever tried it knows.
Mm-hmm.
And especially with the clients that I work with, I see a lot of clients who are a lot of brands just starting out and trying to get their product off the ground. Maybe it's a side business. Maybe they're wanting to kind of make it their full business at a certain point. But it's like any entrepreneur in starting a business, it's hard. There's good times, there's bad times, there's challenges. For me, one of the biggest challenges along the way has been how to best structure my business in order to keep up with the demand from the client side of things. So it started out, it was just me by myself, and I got to a certain point where I had more work than I could handle. So I had to figure out, who to bring in and how to set up my business. For a while, I had a studio with several employees, and now at this point, we're a virtual team, which works out really well because I can scale as needed. So I can pull in a bunch of people on a big project, and I can just kind of go lean for simpler projects that don't require as much team participation. So I'm actually at a point in my business where I really feel like I finally, after all these years, achieved the right kind of balance between personal and work and the right kind of integration, and that my business really supports the kind of lifestyle that I want to be living right now.
I think that's great advice. So often we hire a ton of people and times change, situations change, demand changes, and you get sometimes stuck with hiring too large a team. So it's great to hire as you go for what you need, and working with people remotely helps as well.
Absolutely, yes. I enjoy the flexibility of it, and I find that it works out really well for my clients as well.
Jen, let's talk about how you create the designs. It's no secret that a design needs to create an emotional connection between the food product and the consumer itself. And I remember reading something that you were saying about how you pay attention to the energy that you put into a design and you keep going until it feels right. Can you go into a little bit about how you actually go about the design creating process and how you fine tune that energy? Where on that meter do you know that the energy is right for what you're putting into the product?
So I'm a big proponent of the emotional connection between any food brand and its audience. That usually comes through in the design and messaging of whatever touch points the audience is seeing, be it packaging or signage or collateral, print materials, whatnot. And it's that emotional connection that is going to keep the consumers interested and engaged with the brand and feel like they're really getting something from the brand too. I feel like that a relationship between brand and consumer really needs to go both ways, that they're both getting something out of that relationship, not just a brand speaking to the consumer and giving them information. There really needs to engage, and ways that brands can do this is by their brand story. So honing their story, whatever that may be for them. It might be a really detailed journey as to how they got to where they are. It might be a simpler approach for some other brands, whatever makes sense for that particular brand. And then also what they stand for, what they promise to provide their their audience, that kind of stuff. So actually, I take all of this into account when I start a project with a client, and we gather a lot of information at the start. We're assessing the environment that the product's going to be in, the audience, of course, everything about the nature of the product itself, and why they're making it, why it's different from other competitors, why a consumer should buy it over some other product that's similar, that kind of stuff. So we gather all this information, and I like to liken that as the foundation, as where we start from. So everything that we do from that point on is based in that information. It has to be in alignment with that foundation. I think sometimes people might misunderstand design as just doing something that looks good. And that's part of it, because obviously you want your design that represents your food to look good. But it is very much information-based when you take a strategic approach to that. And you mentioned the energy. I do. So one thing that I've really paid attention to as I've become more and more advanced in my design skills is when I'm working on a project, I get an energy from it. This might sound a little out there, but it's when the elements come together and the messaging is right and it's in sync and it's in alignment with that foundation I mentioned. There's an energy there that I feel when I'm creating, and when it's not there, I don't feel it. I know it's not right if that energy is not there, and I can't really describe it. It's not like a physical energy I feel. It's just when I look at the design, the impression that I get from it. And that, I think, is what is going to affect the consumer too. Are they going to get an energy from it? Is it going to stand out and resonate with them? Because so much of what we see in the marketplace is, we just pass by and it doesn't really catch our attention. So
can you give an example of one of the products that you were working with that maybe didn't initially capture you, but then after a while it just kind of dawned on you?
I'd say it happens with so many projects that, sometimes we might hit the design right away. Other times we might have to go through more of a process to get that. And you never really know until you're going to get into it. But I'd say with every product that we design for, there is that kind of internal trial and error phase. You just really have to try a lot of stuff sometimes to see what's working and what's not. Now, that's not to say that you need to do a bunch of designs, but when we're developing a design, we might change up the elements here and there and change up the fonts, colors, and just see what works along the way. Ultimately, when we present it to the client, it's usually just one or two or three designs that we're considering, but we would have gone through this whole process to get to that point.
Are there a few food brands out there that inspire you and that you feel connect emotionally with the audience and are doing a great job at it?
That's a good question. There are a lot of brands that I connect with. I tend to eat on the healthier, cleaner side of things. I look for products that are, clean, convenient, healthy, or at least good for you. It doesn't have to necessarily be healthy. If I were going to name some names, I'd have to think about. I'd actually have to go look in my kitchen to tell you specifically. But I'm really inspired by a lot of the brands that I work with. I find there's a lot of emerging food brands that are coming up with these really innovative products or presenting traditional products in a new light. For example, right now I'm working on a project with a client who is starting their own line of chutneys, so Indian chutneys. And before, when we were talking about the project, it's interesting because I just assumed, as an American, I assumed that chutney was the kind of sweet, relishy chutney that I might find at like Trader Joe's. Has a really good mango chutney. So I assumed it was that sweet, kind of almost like a jam, like a chutney. But I was really surprised to find out that no, this is a line of savory chutneys. In India, they mostly have their own savory chutneys that they make in different regions. And they might vary a little bit. But from what I understand, from what my client told me, that the sweet chutney is not something that they really consume there. So anyway, she's taking her family's traditional chutney recipes and using, making them with cleaner ingredients and fresher, little twists here and there to present it as an all-purpose kind of
condiment.
Condiment, exactly.
Yeah, that's really cool. It's funny to me when I grew up in India and I have been living here now for a few decades. But yeah, what people think of as Indian food in certain circumstances is so different from what I grew up with. And you're absolutely right. Chutneys to us are savory. When you eat a coconut chutney with a dosa or a tomato chutney with an idli, they're all most of the time pretty savory. And once in a while, you have a sweet chutney that comes from the north of India. But it's exciting to be at that point where you can use packaging and design to really educate people on what's out there.
Exactly. So for a project like that, it's going to require education because it's sort of a new type of product for the American audience. So much of the packaging needs to inform them as to what it is and how they can use it. It's very versatile. So especially when a product has a lot of uses, you want to list all of those so they can see that they're getting more value for their money because they can use it in so many different ways.
Jenn, before the show started, you were talking and you said that a legacy you hope to leave behind was a new way of thinking about food brands and food packaging. What do you mean by that?
I do hope to leave that legacy. I'm actually working on a book right now, which is going to sort of detail my design process, or not necessarily design specifically because it's for food brands, but it's going to go into detail about all the things that you want to consider in order to make your food brand strategic and your food packaging strategic. Like I said before, so many people might think of packaging as just an afterthought, just kind of, we worked so hard to get to this point. Now we just need to put a label on it and get it in a store. That's really not an effective way to do it. And a lot of brands do it that way. It can suffice, but it might not be most effective. What you really want to do with your packaging is take that strategic approach. Like I said, that information foundation in the beginning, and make sure that everything is alignment with it. Make sure your packaging is going through those steps to actually sell the product and guide the consumer toward buying it. Calling out what's important, introducing your brand story and connecting with the audience in an emotional way. It's all those things that, when brands do that, they really are the ones that shine among their competitors.
When does your book come out?
Aiming for the end of the year. It might go into early 2019, but working on it rapidly to get it done.
Do you have a name for it yet?
I do. We went through a few different names. So I just need to make sure I get the one right before I tell it to you. I'm looking it up right now.
Fair enough. Jenn, you had mentioned a quote from Ayn Rand's The Fountainhead that informs your process when you design products. Would you be willing to share that with us?
Sure. Right. So the quote is, "Nothing can be reasonable or beautiful unless it's made by one central idea, and the idea sets every detail." I read this book in high school, and it was about an architect kind of struggling to stay true to his creative intentions, which really resonated with me as a budding designer at that point. And so this quote has always been dear to me in the design process because, like I said, that foundation that we start with in the beginning, that where we gather all that information, every decision from that point on, visually, strategically, message-wise, needs to be in alignment with that foundation. Otherwise, it's not going to be a strong, unified whole in the end. When everything is based in the information, when the colors you choose, the fonts, the look, the approach, the tone you use in the messaging, the words you're using to speak to your audience, when it's in alignment with your foundation, your mission, your vision, your core values, your promise to your consumers, all that stuff, it just creates a very solid, strong result in the end that honestly, it gets results and it gets noticed.
Jenn, I was looking at a quote that you wrote down: "Packaging is the single most important marketing tool for any consumer packaged goods food brand." And I think it's interesting that you're looking at the packaging itself as a marketing tool, and I would agree with you on that. So if we look at the notion of food tourism or food and beverage tourism, and there's a lot of international travel that goes on with that, and people traveling in other countries and maybe not knowing what's on the label, what recommendations or suggestions could you give to people in other countries where not looking at really the legalities of what needs to be on a label in other countries, but more, is there kind of a common denominator that could appeal to people from different languages and cultures? What would you give product manufacturers? What kind of advice would you give them if they were in Spain or Greece or Korea that could appeal to a broader international audience?
That's a good question, Eric. And one thing, I had not really considered that aspect for the work that I do, but yeah, you're right that, you might be traveling and you interested in the product, but you don't really know what it is if you can't read the language that's on it. And I think that the answer there is if much like I do in my business, and I recommend that brands do this for their food products, is to make the visuals of the package design and the information that's on it, the imagery that's on it, make it visually represent the flavors of the product. So for example, if it's a jam, strawberry jam, you're going to want to make it pink or red, put a strawberry on there. So, people can identify with it in a visual way. The reason to do that is not specifically because if they can't read the packaging, although that would help in that situation that you mentioned. The reason I advocate that is because so much of what we see affects us subconsciously. And a lot of the food connection with us, the visuals and how we connect with food on a visual way, is subconscious as well. So you might be able to read that it's strawberry jam, no problem. But visually, when you see that color and that strawberry image on it, that sends a message to you even before you read the text that's on the package, or while you're reading it, that it enhances your processing of that information. Now, this all happens really rapidly. A lot of it is subconscious, like I mentioned, but when your visuals represent what the product is and the experience of the product inside, that influences you in a greater way than just reading the text.
I'm looking at some of the examples of your work on your website, and quite a lot of the packaging is either clear or has a window in it so people can actually see the product.
Yes, and that's very important too. Again, in that situation that you mentioned, it would be applicable as well if somebody can't read the information, but they can see what the product is. So we all want to see what we're buying, whether it's food or anything else. When you can see the actual product, there's a transparency there. You know exactly what you're getting. You know exactly what it looks like. Now, sometimes in a package, it's not feasible to use a transparent package or a clear package where you can see the product. Sometimes you need to use additional barriers to protect longevity that aren't transparent. And in that situation, I always recommend doing a photo when applicable, so you can still get an impression of what it is. Now, when you use a photo, a lot of times it can be a retouched photo that looks really good, and then you open up the package and it maybe doesn't look exactly like it did on the front. So that's why it's always best when you can see the actual product, because there's that level of transparency there that consumers like to see with their food.
Sure, like on your website, and I see the picture of the popcorn, but then you wouldn't want to use transparent packaging for the oils because that could make the oils go rancid.
Exactly. And in that situation, if they had used a transparent pouch, they wouldn't have been able to get the shelf life that they needed for that product. So we went with the foil pouch on that one, and just a totally accurate image of what the product looks like inside.
It's amazing when the amount of traveling I do, I rarely see food and beverage packaging labels in languages other than that of the host country. Sometimes you will see it in Europe where they are required to post ingredients in multiple languages, but oftentimes just the general packaging description doesn't even go there. Just 3 words that say what the product is, and a lot of times that's just missing.
Yeah, and I think as a packaging designer, I can tell you for packages, the reason is that there's usually just not space. Whenever we have to do a bilingual package for, say, Canada, you have to cram so much information on that package, and it ends up not looking necessarily as good as it would just in the single language. So, I mean, that could be an obvious reason that people aren't doing that.
Sure.
And how do you balance that, Jen? As a designer myself, overwhelming people with too much information versus figuring out how much is important to give. It can be quite a challenge.
Exactly. And that's another challenge that a lot of brands struggle with. I help guide my clients through that, is what is really the most important thing to put on the front of the package, because they're going to tell you, well, there's 20 really important things about this product, but and I tell them, well, if we list all those on the front, it's going to overwhelm the consumer, and it's going to look busy and muddled, and they're probably not going to be that interested in the product. So what we do is identify just really the very topmost key selling points and put those on the front of the package, because that's part of that first impression. When they see the front of the package, what is going to speak to them most at that point, and just get them to pick it up. And then, or on a secondary panel, we will put we'll identify what are the secondary key selling points and make those clear as well. So that's part of the stages that the package goes through in the selling of the product.
It probably also depends too on the goal of the business. Is this a product for export or not? There's a food product manufacturer based in Indonesia called Javara. Have you heard of them?
I have not heard of them.
Yeah, they have amazing quality products, and I'm on their website right now, and all of their packaging is in English. And so even though they're based in Indonesia, I see no Indonesian, Bahasa Indonesian language on here at all. Clearly, these products are made for an export market. And I do know that the woman who runs this, she does go to a lot of shows like Fancy Food Show and so on. So that's probably her goal. But I guess, back to the examples of Spain or Greece or South Korea, maybe those products, the product owners, the companies have no aspirations of export, and maybe that's why. But in this example, everything's in English.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I would say they're definitely speaking to their market there.
And I will say, on the flip side of that, Eric, if I'm traveling and I see a product, of course it's helpful to have a few words in English to know what it is. But if the rest of it is in the language of the region it was produced in, I actually find it to be quite authentic, and I pick it up.
Good point. Good point, Ashi.
That is a good point.
Jenn, I'd love to have you share if you have design books that you would recommend to people interested in design, and separately from that, a book you're reading right now or a book you would recommend to our audience.
Yeah, that's a good question. I actually don't read that many design books, surprisingly or not. When I was early on in my career, I would soak up all these different design books that I could. And most of that was compilations of designs. So it's just a book filled with packaging design. And I would pour through those, and then as years went on, I began to see my work in those, so which was a nice perk. But I think with the internet nowadays, I think we get a lot of our information online, and especially from sites like Pinterest, and have kind of taken the place of that, at least for me. But actually, I tend to get more of my inspiration from design just from non-designs, if that makes sense.
Example? Yeah, that's really interesting.
I mean, it could come from anywhere. It could be something I see in nature, or just a color combination I see when I'm out walking around in the city. And I think that as designers, we bring a part of ourselves to the work that we do. Not to say that everything is going to have a similar look or according to our personal preferences, but we really put ourselves into the designs, and that means that everything that we encounter in our life shapes how we design. At least that's always been my view of things. One of my design idols was his name is David Carson, and when I saw him speak, it was probably very early on in my career. I saw him speak, and one of the things that he said was, as designers, be selfish. Put a little bit of yourself into your design, meaning just that, like bring your experiences into your design. And so that's another thing I've always held dear throughout my career. And as far as books I'm reading now, I'm actually getting into history, which was never really my most interesting subject for me. actually had a hard time learning history in school. But my kids who are 8 and 10, they read all these kinds of informational books, and they have this series now called Who Is or Who Was, and it goes through each book details a historical figure and tells all about their life and why they're important and what they did, and also historical events. So I decided I was going to read those, and I've been making my way through those, and they're interesting. They present history in a fresh, interesting, readable way that is memorable, as opposed to sort of the boring texts of like history class in high school and that kind of stuff. So that's something I've been reading lately.
That sounds really cool. I'm going to add it to my list.
I really recommend them. I mean, I know it's a kid's book. They're really interesting.
Jenn, you must have a pet peeve in business, something that really irks you, drives you crazy. What is it?
I do. It's grammatical errors. And especially in packaging design or coming from a brand, when there's any kind of typo or using the wrong form of your is such a turnoff. It can really, it could be an otherwise really highly polished brand with a lot of integrity, but you see, really basic grammatical error like that, it can just discredit the brand immediately. So that's definitely a pet peeve of mine.
Attention to detail is so important.
It is.
Value that with others as well, and you expect that.
It is really, and when I'm doing a design and all the messaging that goes on it, I really go through it with a fine-tooth comb just to make sure that everything is polished and perfect before we go to print, because once it goes to print, that's it.
And as business professionals who are not focused on design, we get busy. And I'm guilty of this as well. Things go out with spelling errors, drives me crazy. And like the email that you just click send on, and then you spotted a misspelled word after it's gone out. That's why we need to hire designers like you who we pay to get that detail right.
And hopefully that we do get it right. But I think in everyday life, so much happens at such fast speed nowadays and I'm guilty of it too. I'll send those emails off with a incomplete sentence or something. It happens to the best of us.
For both of you, have you heard of auto delay on Google emails? It's this perfect thing that gives you 5 seconds to undo the email you just sent.
I have not heard of that. That is great.
All the time.
I'll
keep that in mind. Jenn, what's your favorite food travel memory?
I have quite a few, but one that stands out to me is when my parents took my brothers and my brothers and me, speaking of grammatical errors, on a trip to Europe when I was about 12 or so. And we went through a lot of different countries for 6 weeks. And my most memorable time there was when we were eating in an outdoor cafe outside the Tower of Pisa, and we were having pizza. And so he raises his slice of pizza and says, "I'm having a piece of pizza in front of the Tower of Pisa." And I just love that.
So your dad was a bit of a ham, was he?
He still is.
Nice.
Related, do you have a favorite food or cuisine?
I eat actually a lot of Mexican food lately, just that I make at home. It's, nothing super authentic, but I love just taking a tortilla and throwing in some beans and cheese and some salsa, maybe some other fresh veggies, throw in some avocado. It's so delicious, and it comes together in just a few minutes, and it's healthy. So that's been a lot of what I've been eating lately.
Oh, that's great. And then do you cook with your kids as well? Are they into food as much as you are?
They are. They don't always want to make and eat what I make. So it's always a balance to try and, find stuff that the whole family's going to like. A lot of times they actually have started making their own stuff now. My son
brownies for dinner.
Exactly. My son has started keeping a notebook of recipes that he makes, and
oh wow,
it might be like a popsicle recipe or a drink recipe. Nothing super involved yet, but they're definitely interested in dabbling with food.
That's wonderful.
What's next for Jenn David Design?
That's a good question. Well, I mentioned the book, which the title is actually How to Design Your Specialty Food Packaging to Sell. It's for brands. So that's the next big thing. As far as, the business overall, I really just try to keep paying attention to industry demands and consumer interests. What are consumers interested in terms of specialty food? What are my clients' needs, and just adapting and tweaking the business and what we offer, based on that.
Staying flexible.
Exactly. It's all about flexibility.
Yeah, I think you mentioned that as well in the pre-show discussion, that you can't get comfortable. You have to continue to innovate and always prepare for the unexpected, because it's going to come.
Mm-hmm. It's true. It's true. And I know for me, there's been a lot of unexpected stuff along the way, unexpected moves, or, just kind of unplanned ebb and flow of workflow. So, you've got to stay on your feet and be ready to weather that when it comes. But I do want to point out that a lot of what we talked about here in terms of packaging and consumers and design is completely applicable to any food brand, be it restaurant or store, cafe. The relationship between any kind of food brand and its audience, it really relates to everything that we're talking about here.
That's great advice. So whether it's a B&B or a cooking school or something like that, the same idea or concept of packaging applies.
Exactly. And maybe not packaging specifically, but, we're talking about that emotional connection to food and food brands. So I have an article on my website that talks about the emotions behind food. And it talks about how food is so many different things to us as human beings. It's, on the most basic level, we need it to live. It's energy and sustenance. What we put into our bodies really does affect how we feel. But we also have so many memories that go with food. Everything in our past, those food memories, food travel memories maybe that you mentioned. But so much of that comes into play in terms of our relationship with food, scents that we remember. I mean, I think we've all probably had that experience where we smell something or taste something that we remember from our childhood maybe, and it just brings back all these memories and feelings. And so we really have this kind of intricate and probably somewhat complicated relationship with food.
Related, Jen, what is your thought on purchasing wine bottles? Do you look at the packaging first, or are you a wine connoisseur, so you know exactly what you want?
That's an interesting question. I am not a wine connoisseur, but I do enjoy a good red wine. I base it totally on packaging usually. I have some familiar ones that I go for, but when I'm branching out, I do judge by the label. And I think, much like any food package I might try or beverage, that's what we do as consumers. We go with our first impression.
And what do you look for? Or what catches you?
I look for something that's a little bit creative, but not too creative, and looks kind of sophisticated, but not too sophisticated. I'm really picky. A lot of times I'll just stand there looking at all the labels for a long time, and then I just grab something and go. But and I think as food, that's something that is really important to a consumer. Whether you're going into a restaurant or you're buying a packaged food, is that the impression matches what you're going to get. So I've bought food products before where the packaging was great and I expected this really phenomenal thing inside, but it turned out to be kind of disappointing. Or, I've gone into a restaurant that it looked like it was going to have really great food, but then it ended up being kind of mediocre. So that's really disappointing. And really, I think the message there is that you need to make sure that what you're giving, that food that you're actually, giving to the consumer and the audience is really matching what you're portraying it as.
Jen, what you're really talking about is the customer journey, and whether someone is choosing a destination. So that would be the expectations that we have of that destination, the pre-trip anticipation, or choosing a product. It's the same exact process where we have expectations or anticipations about a product, exactly what you described.
Exactly. Yes, that's correct.
So Jen, when I was a designer, I would get asked, and still do get asked by people, do you need to be educated in design to have a career in design? And what are your thoughts? Can you become a designer without going to school to study design?
That's a really good question, Ashi. I guess I'm I'm a little biased maybe because I did go to school for design. So I think it helps. It really helps to have a creative foundation to build from. My education was actually not specifically design. My college was a liberal arts college where I majored in studio art. And then within that studio art major, you could select which creative area you wanted to specialize in. So that's where I chose design. But I really feel that having that well-rounded education, and especially the exposure to all the different art forms. I wasn't just doing design. I was doing ceramics and printmaking, drawing, painting, mixed media, you name it. It was in there. And I really feel like all that experience comes into my work as a designer, and as a business owner as well. So, I couldn't imagine doing it any other way, especially in design. There's so much technical things, technical knowledge that you need. And certainly that could be picked up, but there's a creative element as well that I think really takes a foundation, at least, somewhere, even if it's not formal school training, you could certainly do it on your own. It might be a little harder, but probably cheaper because you'd save on tuition. But having that foundation, I think, is going to make you a better designer in the end.
Yeah. And it's such a gratifying career because you see tangible results, and it really works your creative self and is a great way to express yourself. Just like you said, there's a little part of you in every design that you put out there.
It really is. And I still do a lot of other art forms too, although finding time to do it is a struggle. But part of my struggle is that I think my preferred art form is design. So what I'm doing on a daily basis is really satisfying my creative desires, even though it's not my own personal design for myself. But like you said, it is very gratifying for me to help these food brands, whether they're starting out or established brands, to either launch their product or improve their product, get results. When I hear that sales have increased or they've gotten new accounts in new stores or gotten into Costco, it's really gratifying and just so exciting for me to hear those things, because it just tells me that what we're doing is working.
Well, Jen, I am looking again on your page of your work examples, and there's a couple brands on here that I've actually seen in stores. So next time I'm in one of those stores, I'm going to say, I know the woman who designed that label.
There are some that I see in pretty much every supermarket I go into. And it's funny because I'll point out to my kids, like, hey, that's a product I designed. And they're like, yeah, I know. They're a little tired of hearing that, but it never gets old for me.
Well, it's testimony to your skill. I mean, you're the real deal, and there's the evidence.
Yeah. And it's also testimony to the clients as well, because there's a lot more work that they have to do on their end, as opposed to just, more than just having a great design. But I don't think you could get there without having a package that really works and sells itself. Yeah.
Well, I would like to draw people's attention to your blog. I truly enjoy getting your email newsletters, which don't come very often. And it's fantastic because it's one of those things that when you finally send your newsletter, I'm really excited to read it as opposed to the one that comes all the time. And the one that prompted me to get in touch with you to ask you to be on the show was this post that you posted last month called The New Relationship with Food, and how consumer expectations have evolved. And I think that really ties into the customer journey conversation we were just having.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm glad to hear that you enjoy my articles. Thank you very much, Eric. But specifically that new relationship with food, that was one that I was really proud to release because I'd worked on it for a while. But it's basically the result of my study and assessment of sort of what is the next big thing for the specialty food industry. We've gotten, in a way, a little bit disconnected from our food with all the automation and technology that's happened with food purchasing process and also in the food manufacturing process. Oftentimes the end result of what we purchase in the store is has literally traveled a great distance to get there, and so many hands have touched it. Not literally touched it, but worked on it and participated in the manufacturing of that product that we don't even know about or think about. And so the message in that study is that it's sort of time to get reconnected with the source of our food, and who are the farmers growing our food, and who are the people making the food, and why. And it really ties back into that emotional connection and the brand story. The people behind the brand is what consumers are going to resonate with.
Storytelling.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Jenn, how can people read these blog articles? Can you give us your URL, please?
Yeah, you can find them at jenndavid.com. That's JENNDAVID.com. And there's a whole article section there in the blog that has all our articles. And you can also sign up to get them by email.
Is that under your free stuff section?
It's under the blog, but there is a lot of stuff in the free stuff section. I've worked really hard to make my website very informative and educational for food brands. So there's a lot of free stuff there. There's the articles, and then there's some more in-depth downloads and sort of workshop items that we have available for free downloads.
Colors that influence food sales. I'm going to download that right now.
That's actually one of our most popular articles that we just released this morning as an infographic and an updated article as well with more tips on color usage for food.
Nice. Okay,
Thank you so much, Jenn. It's been a pleasure speaking with you and hearing about your world.
Thank you both. I'm honored to be on the podcast.
Thank you, Jenn. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks, Eric. I appreciate being here. And Ashi?
That's all for this episode of Eat Well, Travel Better, the business of food travel, produced by the World Food Travel Association. Join us next time where we learn from some of the world's most successful people in the food and beverage tourism industry. We'll meet these leaders and examine their secrets of success. We reveal the obstacles and challenges they have faced, along with their solutions and triumphs, and give you ideas and inspirations for many of the same business issues that you may be facing as well. Thank you for joining us today, and until next time, eat well and travel better.